We're at meeting 22 of the House of Commons Standing Committee of Natural Resources. And as we usually do, before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including our amazing interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card, which links to a short awareness video. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format. We have 2 participants virtually and 1 in person. And I would like to remind participants of the following points before speaking. Please wait until I recognize you. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. I think we're good. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Thursday, September 18th, the committee shall, that's 2025, the committee shall resume its study of Canadian energy exports. I would like to welcome our witnesses online. We have Lisa Baiton, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, CAP for short. Catherine Swift, President of the Coalition of Concerned Manufacturers and Businesses of Canada. Francis Bradley, President and Chief Executive Officer of Electricity Canada. You will each have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open the floor to questions. And Ms. Baiton, we're going to start with you. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the members of committee for the opportunity to appear before you today and contribute to this critically important study. And I say critically important because expanding Canadian exports, particularly oil and gas, is one of the most effective ways we can strengthen our economy, improve our productivity, and safeguard our national sovereignty. It is very encouraging to CAP and my membership to have a federal government and members across parties looking to grow Canada's role as a global supplier of responsibly produced oil and gas. Let me begin with the global context. World events have substantially altered Canada's economic and geopolitical circumstances. The ongoing uncertainty with the Canada-US relationship in the context of global trade is putting Canada at risk. Other nations from China and Russia have shown that they will use whatever strengths they have to dominate or to control valuable resources, and in particular, oil and natural gas resources, because of the dominant role they play in the global energy mix today and will play in the future. Around the world, traditional drivers such as population growth and the rapid modernization of economies, especially in the global south, continue to push energy needs higher. In the global north, electrification, data centers, and artificial intelligence are escalating energy consumption at a pace few anticipated. Even with the continuing growth of renewables, the world will continue to rely on conventional energy for decades. Over the last 35 years, the share of hydrocarbons in the global primary energy mix has barely shifted from 85% in 1990 to roughly 80% today. We need to approach energy with an addition mindset. The growth of renewables will simply be layered on top of the growth of conventional energy in order to meet a voracious, growing global appetite for all forms of energy. The core question before us is not whether energy demand will continue to grow, but whether Canada will choose to help meet that demand. It is an urgent question for a resource-rich and trade-dependent nation like ours, where economic force and not market fairness is now shaping the rules. Today, most Canadian oil and natural gas exports are sold at a discount to a single customer, the USA, costing our economy nearly $50 billion over the past 15 years. This is despite Canada having one of the largest untapped resource endowments on the planet. Canada can and should be a global energy superpower. We're seeing the benefits when export infrastructure gets built. CAP estimates that the Trans Mountain expansion will contribute $4 billion in additional revenues every year, increasing Canada's GDP, improving productivity, and delivering higher revenues for governments. On the natural gas side, every full LNG cargo leaving Canada's west coast is worth approximately $59 million. And the benefits to Canadians are profound. First, diversified markets strengthen our trade leverage, ensure we secure full value for our resources, and enhance the strength of our nation's sovereignty. Oil and natural gas represents more than 20% of Canada's total balance of trade. Second, over just 3 years, the sector contributed approximately $116 billion in taxes and royalties, and those revenues are essential to funding our defense spending and to public services. Third, since 2017, over $5 billion in Indigenous equity has been invested in energy projects, and this is a true partnership, and Canada's conventional energy sector is emerging as a global model. Fourth, our sector is foundational to Canada's economy, providing about 450,000 direct and indirect jobs in every single province across the country, and contributing over $85 billion to GDP just last year. To continue to realize these benefits at this consequential moment in our history, we must avoid policy changes and choices that increase costs, compliance burdens, and uncertainty, such as the newly amended methane regulations and the proposed changes to the industrial carbon pricing, which will impose billions in new costs when no competitor producer nation is doing the same. If Canada truly wants to become an energy superpower, we need a new policy approach. In this new era of economic nationalism, major changes required to attract the investment, to rebuild our economy, to create high-quality jobs, to enhance our energy security, and to strengthen our sovereignty. The window for Canada to act is open, but it won't be open indefinitely, so Canada can and must move with urgency. The future will require more energy, and if we set the policy conditions right, it will be more Canadian energy. Thank you for your time.
I gave you a few extra seconds there, and
Oh, sorry about that.
Swift, on to you for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. My organization, the CCMBC, represents the interests of small and medium-sized manufacturers and businesses in other sectors, but the preponderance of them are in the manufacturing sector. The Canadian manufacturing sector has been shrinking for some time. Since 2018, manufacturing as a percentage of GDP decreased by 5%, while the comparable US number increased by 10%. Clearly a major difference that hasn't been seen before. This is important because the manufacturing sector in any country is a key source of innovation, productivity, and well-paid employment. Manufacturing sector and the energy sector are closely linked, especially in Canada. Many manufacturing companies in Eastern Canada are heavily dependent on the oil and gas sector for their success. Too many Canadians believe that if punitive policies are imposed on the oil and gas sector, that's Alberta and Saskatchewan's problem, when in reality it significantly affects the welfare of the entire country. Manufacturing used to represent about 20% of Canada's GDP, whereas it now sits around 10%. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. Growth of the service sector, technological change, different laws, regulations, and so on in different countries. The admission of China into the World Trade Organization in 2001 is often in hindsight viewed as a huge mistake, as much manufacturing in Western countries went to lower-cost China, which does not observe the same environmental, human rights, wage, and other policies of Western nations. China also abuses intellectual property rights, dumps goods into Canada at unreasonably low prices, does not abide by WTO trade rules, and interferes in elections and other elements of our countries, including Canada. Our government's recent moves to bring us closer to China is a mistake for our manufacturing sector and our economy in general, not to mention our sovereignty. Much of the decline in manufacturing in Ontario and other provinces can be linked to the so-called green policies that drastically increase the cost of electricity. Manufacturers are big consumers of electricity and were made much more uncompetitive by these foolish policies. The industrial carbon tax and methane regulations that Ms. Baiton referred to, they will fall heavily on the manufacturing sector and the energy sector, our two most productive sectors of the Canadian economy. We know that Canada has a serious productivity problem. To impose such an onerous regime, regulatory and tax, on the two sectors that contribute most to productivity, which is a proxy for our standard of living, is ridiculous. Once again, our businesses are being asked to compete with one hand tied behind their backs as their foreign competitors don't face similar taxes and regulations. Increasing energy exports will boost manufacturing as the sectors are so closely linked. Building pipelines and other infrastructure to enable increasing exports can and should be done in Canada. Unfortunately, some recent energy projects have actually helped foreign manufacturers much more than our own. The Kitimat LNG facility, for example, used modules from China in its first phase and is slated to use modules from Korea in its second phase. Many of our manufacturing members have said they would be capable of providing infrastructure for these projects, but were never given the opportunity. Boosting oil and gas exports would also bring well-paid employment to Canada, more revenues for governments, and boost our flagging economy, which appears now to be in recession. Neglecting our most important individual industrial sector, oil and gas, for the last decade is the key reason for our weak economic performance today. A weak economy makes us much more vulnerable to punitive policies of other countries, such as the US and China, among others. Additional government revenues from more energy exports should be used to pay down our massive public debt and implement policies to lower taxes and the onerous regulatory burden that is making all of our Canadian businesses less competitive. I want to make a few comments on Bill C5, which permits the government to selectively override various pieces of legislation. What this bill concedes is that these laws are bad, or they wouldn't have to be overridden to get anything done. Why not get rid of the bad laws completely? The fact they sit on the books further discourages foreign and domestic investment, which has been fleeing Canada for years. C5 also facilitates winner picking by government, which has never been a workable strategy. Just look at the billions of tax dollars that have been wasted on the EV battery sector at a time when Canada has no money to waste. Finally, the business community wants a trade deal with the US as soon as possible. Implying Canada can significantly replace US trade with other countries is pure fiction. We should also always be seeking to diversify our trading relationships, but pretending we'll be able to replace the US as our largest trading partner by far is just lying to Canadians for partisan political gain to whip up Canadians' dislike of President Trump. Meanwhile, Canadian businesses and workers suffer, losing jobs, going out of business, or moving out of Canada. Uncompetitive conditions in the Canadian economy have driven many manufacturers out of Canada long before Trump came along. Once a country loses its manufacturing sector, it doesn't come back for a very long time, if ever. Thank you.
Time. I really appreciate that. And finally, we are going to go to Mr. Bradley. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm Francis Bradley. I am President, CEO of Electricity Canada.
Pour l'étude des exportations d'énergie. Cette étude tombe à bon point car le Canada a l'ambition de devenir une superpuissance énergétique.
Canada has the ambition to become a superpower in energy. Electricity has a great role to play in this project. Electricity Canada is the national way for the sector of electricity. Our members produce, transport and distribute electricity in each territory and province.
Economy and is a competitive advantage for Canadian industry. These three stats demonstrate how exceptional our sector is. First, 84%. That's the percentage of non-emitting electricity generated in Canada. This makes our grid already one of the cleanest ones in the world. 99.98%. That's the reliability rate of our grid, ensuring the lights turn on when needed. And 51%. That's how much lower our electricity rates are compared to the OECD average, solidifying our competitive advantage over our peers. The electricity sector plays a fundamental role as an exporter and enabler of energy exports. The electricity sector is a net exporter exporting an average of 40 terawatt hours annually to the United States over the last decade. In 2024, the value of this trade was $4.484 billion. While the trade surplus has been smaller in recent years, the two-way trade still serves as an important and ongoing role for reliability and resilience. However, electricity is essentially exported in every other sector of the economy, from LNG to aluminum. Almost every export in Canada is, to a degree, an electricity export. For example, the electrification of the expected Cedar LNG facility with clean BC electricity has been foundational for the project's advancement. The natural gas liquefied at this facility will be destined overseas and marketed as among the lowest carbon LNG in the world. Electricity also powers the production of aluminum in Canada, which is mostly exported. In 2021, we effectively exported over 40 terawatt hours of electricity in the form of aluminum. The list could go on and on, from critical minerals to petroleum refinement. Electricity makes it happen. As Canada seeks to diversify our trade relationships, advance nation-building projects, and strengthen the competitiveness of our industries, the electricity system must grow with these industrial priorities while preserving our sector's competitive advantage. Canada is experiencing a rapid increase in electricity demand, which is expected to double by 2050. To meet demand, we are going to have to build more electricity infrastructure in the next 25 years than we have in the last century. So our task is to build again, decisively and ambitiously, to grow the electricity system that is at the heart of Canada's long-term prosperity. Last month, we launched our 2026 State of the Canadian Electricity Industry Report, titled Forging Canada's Electricity Future, and it provides recommendations to support the government's ambitious goal of making Canada a global energy superpower. So to achieve this, we have three key recommendations. First, we must modernize our regulation for a 21st century electricity system. For starters, the government should implement a 2-year federal approval timeline for all electricity projects. Second, we must mobilize capital to finance the build-out. This means making the most of existing supports and removing barriers to investments, things like the Eiffel rules. Et enfin, nous devons renforcer.
Finally, we need to strengthen the sector's capacity and resilience. In order to get there, we need to work with the sector to mitigate the impact of extreme weather events and to address the growing workforce shortage as well as problems relating to supply chains. We have the rare opportunity to unlock the potential of our country, and we must take advantage of it.
Mr. Bradley. And now we're going to go to our first round of questions. And Mrs. Stubbs, we're going to start with you.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much. Thank you to all the witnesses today for your messages of unity and calls for action for Canada to thrive, be self-reliant and self-sufficient, needed now more than ever before. Ms. Swift, I wonder if you've already actually sketched out part of what has occurred and why Canada is in this position that it is. I agree with you completely that there were many ways in which this has been self-inflicted. To both you and Lisa, do you have confidence that there will be the transformative change in policy and regulation that you require, given that the Liberals are talking about building big projects, but so far have brought in C5, which clearly indicates all the laws and regs that block projects, but haven't actually repealed or reformed any one of them? Maybe Ms. Swift will start with you, and Lisa, and with you. And if you want to add in there the points of competitiveness with the United States, I think that'd be appreciated.
Yes. As the old saying goes, the best predictor of future performance is past behavior. As much of this current federal Liberal government is very similar to the ones that kneecapped pipelines in Canada for years, I would like to believe we are going to see a pipeline, but no, I don't have full confidence. I think we haven't seen action to date. We've seen things like MOUs, which are fine, and they do lay out certain details that are important to do so, but they're not binding by any stretch. think it's talking with many people in the energy sector, and Lisa undoubtedly has a lot to say about that too. The whole notion of the carbon capture and storage as a precondition for a pipeline, among other considerations, is a hugely expensive thing. That do we really need such a massively expensive exercise to so-called decarbonize carbon, which makes you think of maybe water that isn't wet or something like that. That putting the price of a pipeline based on such things, I feel, is totally unnecessary. I know that carbon capture is feasible and all that has been proven and whatnot, but I think the cost of it merely drives up the cost of energy, something we already have an issue with in Canada, and of course makes us less competitive internationally. So I guess I have my serious doubts, but I'd sure like to be proven wrong.
And Lisa may wish to comment, given that, of course, there were 2 private sector proposals for intergovernmental federal jurisdiction, but the federal government didn't use all of its tools to ensure those proposals. So they've abandoned the country, as have other companies building pipelines. Any comments on, although a pipeline's been mentioned in an MOU, there is to say that they'll assert federal jurisdiction, continues to say that there needs to be a private sector proponent, although a premier had to put 3 together because no one's willing to do it alone. And actually, there's no clear pathway to one at all. I don't know if you have any comments about that.
Sure. I would just say at the beginning, from CAP's perspective, we are pipeline agnostic. We do believe in fast tracking necessary infrastructure to develop existing and new markets as the best way to achieve Canada's vision to make our country into a global energy superpower. And CAP supports any new commercially viable capacity in respect of the pipeline. That is in discussions as part of the Alberta MOU. The Alberta government has a desire to see production grow to 6 million barrels per day by 2030 and to 8 million barrels per day by 2035. And CAP is supportive of the government of Alberta's work to advance a West Coast pipeline and do whatever they can do to de-risk the project and make it as attractive as possible for private investment. And we have learned from experience, building pipelines in Canada has proven to be a very significant challenge and requires a highly coordinated, transparent, and collaborative approach. And that also means meaningful engagement with Indigenous communities early in the process. And I would just say that in terms of, I think you referenced the Trans Mountain pipeline. I think we've seen, as I've noted, in my
Which the I think what is perplexing to want to see Canada prosper is the fact that the Liberals are maintaining ban after prohibition, after tax, after mandate, that the United States does not impose on itself federally. So if we are indeed in wartime footing and we are dealing with an aggressor who is our biggest customer and our biggest competitor because of this last federal government, then what do these guys actually need to do to prove to Canadians that they're serious? Catherine?
Get rid of all the bad laws. Again, I find it ludicrous that there's this backstopping legislation which gives the government a very selective ability to override things. If you got to override them, clearly there's a big problem. Just get rid of them. The methane regulations are terrible, and as Lisa highlighted, and they haven't got enough attention, frankly. The industry itself is extremely concerned, but they haven't got enough attention. All of the taxes and so on, all of those, I think that Premier Danielle Smith calls them the 9 bad laws, and some of them are being softened somewhat for this project. But if we want to attract investment, and investors, both foreign and domestic, see those laws on the books, they're not going to risk their own money. Governments don't risk their own money. They risk our money and unfortunately lose quite a bit of it in the process. So they should be gone. All of those bad laws should be gone.
Thank you both. And we're going to go on to Mr. Hogan for 6 minutes. Mr. Hogan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all our witnesses. Ms. Baiton, it is good to see you again. I am of the strong opinion that every committee meeting needs a few good Calgarians. And I totally agree that there is going to be oil and gas demand for many, many decades. Even in a world that uses less oil. Is how do we take advantage of that opportunity and do it in a way that is, distinctly Canadian? So oil and gas production from 15 to 24 was up 34% in Canada, globally about 6%. Growth in Alberta up 40% in the oil sands, I believe around there. And that's been very good for this country. It's created jobs across this country. Steel for pipelines comes from Ontario. The Inyo Wakusha engine comes from Ontario. It's straddling all sorts of, technology all across this side of the continent, the part I'm from, I guess I should say. I guess I'm in Ottawa today. And the outcomes are really good. According to the UBS Global Wealth Report, median wealth in Canada is $152,000 US. Median wealth in the US is $124,000 US. So we've done a good job of creating broad wealth. So I know that Ms. Swift says past performance is the best indicator of future behavior, and those results would give comfort. But I'd like not to leave that to chance. I'd like to keep that going. I'd also like to know that we're doing it in a way that's less resilient on the U.S. So my question, and I apologize for the long preamble, of course, there's always a lag between FID to operation. Some of the growth we're seeing is the result of decisions a decade ago. I'm curious about the pipeline forward, excuse the pun. I'm not arguing for the status quo, but how do we expect production to evolve under a status quo case in the next few years, Ms. Baiton?
Am I on? I would like to focus on so again, I will just repeat that CAP doesn't take a position on one pipeline over another. What we do really push for is two things: that it's commercially viable, and then we invite people to remember that there is a business case that is required to attract the capital and go through the process to build a pipeline. And separate and distinct from that, there is the requirement for what producers need to attract capital of their own to scale up, to fill and keep filled any new pipeline. And I would say that portion of the public discourse has been largely absent. And that's why we are really focusing on policy that on the producer side, because there's two parts, there's a whole equation, and we've only been focused on that one part of the equation. And so for our part of the equation, we're really focused on regulatory certainty and competitive policy. Again, as I said in my opening remarks, carbon policy that is competitive with other producing nations. And so we're very focused on right now, both on the methane regulations and on industrial carbon pricing. The new federal methane regulations that were released just before Christmas were are incompatible with operations. We identified very early on that those regulations were unworkable, and really insufficient amendments were adopted in the final regs to address industry concerns. And by the federal government's own analysis, those new methane regs will place an additional net new $14.6 billion new compliance cost on the industry, when again, no other producing nation is doing that. And on the industrial carbon system, Canada's system really has to be competitive. And again, in December, there was a recently released discussion paper, which is fundamentally misaligned both with the direction from the Prime Minister and the commitments in the Canada-Alberta MOU. As proposed, it's going to impose billions of dollars of costs to the oil and gas industry and other resource-based industries. And again, higher costs for carbon directly reduce Canada's competitiveness.
Some specificity, and I'd encourage you to, I know you already have, but submit written report as well.
We did, yes.
On something you've given me, the point that I wanted to get to is question 2. You said in your opening remarks, economic force, not market fairness, is shaping the rules. And you talked about, again, right now, about new costs with no competitor nations doing the same. And so, market fairness is really important to me. I want to make sure we're competitive, but it doesn't seem like this is a market that's being driven entirely by market economics. Between, Europeans creating rules around carbon intensity, Japan may be following, between China using its heft in the market. So what do we need to do to protect a functioning global market? as a country that doesn't really use state power to drive industry, but instead allows industry to thrive on their own, or at least that's what we aspire to.
Well, I think it's not a one-size-fits-all situation, and a direct comparison of Canada to Europe probably isn't relevant. I will speak to the USMCA negotiations, and as I said in my opening remarks, the Canadian oil and gas industry represents over 20% of Canada's entire balance of trade, and the majority of that, currently I think it's close to 95%, goes to one single customer, the US. And so the USMCA will be a big component part of that, because even with all of the uncertainty and the threats and the trade challenges being caused by the Trump administration, we still must recognize that the US is the largest oil and gas consumer on the planet and remains by far Canada's largest customer. And we've traded energy virtually tariff-free for nearly 150 years, and our companies operate seamlessly across the border, and our energy infrastructure, pipelines, refineries are highly interconnected. So that's one piece of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. We're now going to go on to Monsieur Simard. 6 minutes.
Oui. Avant de débuter mon temps.
Before I start my time, Derry, I just want to make sure that our witnesses can hear the interpretation. Is the interpretation working for our witnesses? Yes. Excellent. You've got a nice interpreter's voice, not mine.
Madame Baiton.
Perhaps for you, Miss Baiton, I was told something I learned something simple in politics. You need to make a distinction between what we want and reality. It's unfortunate, but politically, that's the way it works. In the first meeting that we had on this study, Professor Musso and Pinault told us that Canada was not an energy power and will never be an energy superpower, and we have a very insignificant effect on energy prices. So perhaps you could respond to this statement a little bit later, because in your initial statement, you described Canada as being an energy superpower. But something that bothers me, and I'll tell you, and I'm trying to figure it out, in your statement, you also said that there is a certain geopolitical reality whereby we need to develop a new market given the current situation with the United States. And this is where I'm a little bit bothered by this. When we take a look a little closer at the oil sector, we realize that 60% of these oil companies belong to American interests. Between 2021 and 2024, these businesses made record profits, $131 billion. And $6 out of $10 is returned in dividends to American companies. So how can we see the energy sector as being one that will allow us to stop depending on American interests? Because if we produce gas and pipeline infrastructure, well then at the end of the day, we're giving them a gift, because we're facilitating a new market for them and we're guaranteeing additional profits. So perhaps you could educate me on this. How do you appraise this situation on the ownership structure of these major oil companies?
So thank you for that question. There's a lot in there, so let me try to parse that out. First of all, to clarify, I did not ever say that Canada was an energy superpower. I was just echoing what our Prime Minister has said, that we should aspire to be an energy superpower. And, I think, just to use the recent words of Prime Minister Carney, that we should talk about the world as it is and what Canada should do to make the world into what we wish it to be. And today, the world as it is, it's in a period of profound geopolitical and economic change. And the current U.S. administration has an unapologetic America First policy, and it's rewriting longstanding norms in global trade. And for Canada, that new normal is not a debate. It's an urgent question. How should a resource-rich and trade-dependent nation position itself in a world where economic force and not market fairness is setting the rules? But On the other hand, just like you have federal and provincial governments really working hard to preserve the veracity of the Canada-US trade agreement, that's a really critical recognition of the world as it is and Canada as it is. As I said in my previous remarks on USMCA, we over the last lost decade, there was decisions not to build east-west egress or tidewater egress, and we are now in a situation where 20% of our entire balance of trade goes north-south. And, you can't just lickety split, build a pipeline. So we also have to recognize the critical nature of preserving.
Thank you. Sorry, I don't have much time. I appreciate your response. And yes, we need to see the world in a realistic way. And the world as it is shows us that the last pipeline infrastructure built, well, it was the federal government that paid for it. It cost $34 billion, and it wasn't a private business, or there was no private business that wanted to be involved in the project. Not only that, but today we pay $7 per barrel to use this infrastructure, Trans Mountain. So I'm wondering, how can a private business, without any public support today, accept to develop a pipeline infrastructure that will take years to build? Is there a market over the next 20, 30 years for Alberta oil, which can justify the type of investment, this type of investment from a private company? Or do we need to realize that we're going to have public investment to build a new pipeline? So if we take the world as it is, so I'd like to hear from you on this. I don't see any private actor that's willing to invest in a pipeline infrastructure.
Well, let me take that in two parts. In terms of global demand, all credible energy forecasts going forward indicates that energy demand is going to be growing up and up, and we are going to need all forms of energy, renewables and conventional, to meet the ferocious and appetite for global energy. Larry Fink at BlackRock last year said we need to move away from an energy transition to an energy addition mindset, because the immensity of growing demand, particularly coming from AI, is really driving that. And then to the second part of your question on why TMX was publicly funded or paid for by the Canadian government. Regulatory certainty is required to have investor certainty. Canada does not have that at the moment, and that's why investors did not come to Canada. And that is the thesis that I have presented to the committee today. Thank you.
Now, colleagues, we're going to move on to the second round, and we're going to start with Mr. Millett.
Thank you. Mr. Bradley, you are the CEO of Electricity Canada. Thank you for your presentation. More specific question, to your opinion, what will happen in 2035 when Canada's clean electricity regulations take effect? And what will that mean for the average consumer's electricity bill and overall cost of living?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the member asks a very pertinent question, and it has been a concern for our association. The clean electricity regulations are, well, I guess the discussion and dialogue around the clean electricity regulations are in a bit of a flux right now. We do see that it is part and parcel of a conversation, for example, between the Government of Canada and the Government of Alberta. But, ever since the beginning of this process, and once we saw the final regulations that came forward, we were very clear that, one, we felt that decisions around these matters should have been based upon the best estimates of the people that are actually running the electricity grids at a provincial level. And what they were telling us is that the clean electricity regulations as written would have a significant impact on the reliability and on the cost of electricity for customers in a number of jurisdictions in this country. So that is certainly still the case because the CERs are still on the books.
What impact will it have on different provinces, if you can take the key ones?
Well, I mean, I don't have like all of the details, but quite simply, the more carbon intensive the electricity system is in a province, the greater potential impact that will be on these clean electricity regulations. And so, you know, while we're you know, I'm from Quebec, where this is not an issue because we have we were lucky enough to have massive hydroelectric resources. The same is the case, for example, in British Columbia. But yeah, if you happen to be in a jurisdiction that doesn't have that resource endowment, so for example, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, but even here in Ontario, the system operator here in Ontario has expressed concerns about the clean electricity regulations and the impacts that they might have even here in Ontario, and that is with not insignificant hydro resources here in Ontario and a very robust non-emitting nuclear sector as well.
Okay, well, that takes me to my next question. So you mentioned the energy demand will double by 2050. So for the provinces that have the hydroelectricity has been maximized, who will become the lead in different type of electricities?
So the view of our members has always been and continues to be that the future is going to be one where an all-of-the-above approach is going to be required. Because there are different resource opportunities in different regions, each region is going to have to look at what its opportunities are for non-emitting or lower-emitting energy resources, and with a doubling of demand, it is going to mean that we are going to have to essentially double down on nuclear. We're going to have to double down on hydro, wind, solar, storage, energy efficiency, and interconnections. That's the other thing that we need to recognize is that we've got 31 transmission interconnections between Canada and the United States. Historically, the bulk of the trade in electricity has been north-south, and much less of it is east-west. We're not advocating for, you know, a line that goes from one coast to the other, but a greater regional cooperation and collaboration is going to be part of this mix as well to be able to meet those challenges of the future. And, you know, we think the federal government has a role to play in terms of acting as a convener and in some instances as helping to facilitate some of that build-out that's going to be required on a regional basis for more transmission.
Just about at the end of your time, Mr. Millett, 20 seconds.
Yeah. We are a net exporter. Will we keep that?
We are a net exporter. Will we likely to keep that? Yes, we likely will, but it's a nature of the kind of the mix that we have. We will be a more of a net exporter on the years when we have a lot of water. On the years when there's a drought, it will be challenging.
Thank you both. On to Mr. Gay for 5 minutes. Mr. Gay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bradley, good to see you. In your recently published report, Forging Canada's Electricity Future, you mentioned that the Major Project Office is, and I quote, significant step towards addressing the challenges of uncertain approval processes. You've also mentioned that this must be taken even further, down to small-scale project through elimination of provincial process duplication. So how do you feel that what we've done so far, and what do we need to do to build even faster, better, easier?
Thank the member for, I think, a very interesting question. I appeared before the committee that was studying C5 as it was going through the process, and what I said then, and I will essentially repeat it now. I think C5 is a very strong signal that there is an interest to build things. Our concern continues to be that there are other challenges that C5 certainly facilitates, if you happen to be one of those projects of national interest, as some people call them, the ponies. If you're a pony, there is this concierge approach to moving projects forward. We see it though as hopefully setting the stage for how we will more broadly address projects. We recognize that while we've got concerns with a number of regulatory and legislative challenges, that they can't all be fixed at once, and so we do recognize that that's the case. But we're hoping that the experience with the Major Projects Office and how it rolls out its programming can then apply to, for example, the medium and smaller projects, because our future isn't going to be just a handful of major projects. It's going to be hundreds, thousands of projects, and hopefully the work of the Major Projects Office is going to show us the way to be able to get projects built more efficiently. But we still do have to address some of those core fundamental issues with impact assessment and the Fisheries Act and so on.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. I want to pick up on a question that Mr. Millett asked you earlier and give you more time to talk about that. In terms of, talk to me about the importance of intertie versus, because this study is about exporting and unleashing Canada's export of energy. There's deregulation from clean energy in the U.S., but some governors, I was seeing today Premier Houston with the governor of Massachusetts, there's a big demand in some states in the U.S. for clean Canadian electricity, but there's also the requirements for the intertie for us in helping the demand within Canada. So how do you see this playing out?
It is a very complex situation. Some people have suggested that what's referred to as the Eastern Electricity Interconnection, so basically all of Eastern North America is interconnected and operates as a single machine. They say it's the largest machine in the world. It is incredibly complex. We will always be, because of that, we will always be interconnected with the United States. The question, though, is can we improve, to begin with, some of our interconnections in Canada to the benefit of Canadians? Also recognize that, as I said in my comments, when we think about electricity and electricity trade, it isn't just kilowatt hours. It's products, it's aluminum, it's a wide variety of these things, and so we would like to see certainly the expansion of those. But when you look at an overall North American grid, yes, Americans certainly over the longer term are going to be interested in potentially clean kilowatt hours coming from Canada. But in the instance and in the case of, for example, the Northeast and their desire to one day develop offshore wind, what they're going to want from Canada is not necessarily our kilowatt hours. They're going to want our capacity. They're going to want to be able to interconnect into our system so that essentially, basically, the hydro systems in Canada, the major hydro system in Quebec, can act as a buffer and a battery for their system, because they will not be able to operate, for example, a standalone offshore wind system if it isn't interconnected with a more reliable system. So I think there will be North American overall benefits towards this, but there will also be those regional benefits that. Well, and the nuclear from Ontario, absolutely. And another thing I would mention about.
Thank you. That's your time. Unfortunately, you can address it at another time. But it is so.
It was an interesting question.
Well, you will have an opportunity in just a few minutes, Mrs. Stubbs, to have a follow-on. But we're to Mr. Samar for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Thierry.
Thank you, Terry. Very interesting. We had Professor Musso earlier this week who explained this whole dynamic of the electricity sector where we need to manage points and how a Hydro-Quebec can act as a battery, which would be helpful. And what's interesting and what Professor Musso mentioned was the technical advances. Right now, wind power, solar, and with new battery systems and all the advances in storage mean that we can have a lot more predictability in terms of these technologies. But the major problem, according to the professor, and I'd like to hear from you on this, is that Canada invests very little in these technologies. We're not at the forefront in terms of these storage techniques. He provided the example of thermal pumps. So I'd like to hear from you on this. I think that this is an important thing to invest in. That is to say, these technologies which would allow us to have more clean electricity. Yes, I completely agree with the professor.
On the other question, though, was to what degree can we develop technologies here in Canada? To what degree can we, for example, build and have supply chains that we can count on in this country? And I would absolutely agree that we are not spending enough on research, but we have the opportunity, because of the basics of our electricity system, we have the opportunity to be once again the global leaders. You know, a generation ago, we were absolutely the leaders in long-distance transmission, in major hydroelectric developments. We built with ambition in the 1960s and the 1970s. The other thing we did, though, and that's where I was about to head before, the other thing we did is we also built an incredible supply chain, for example, with respect to nuclear. Our CANDU technology is a Canadian technology. It continues to deliver. The supply chain is within this country. And so as we look to hopefully the next generation of ambition, as we build forward, as we try and figure out how we're going to take advantage of new storage opportunities, that we have we're building the technology here in this country, and we have a supply chain here in this country.
Rapidement, sans vous faire...
And very quickly, without asking you to commit, just given the spirit of our report, is the government's proposal with financial support for clean electricity, it's all well and good, but would you agree that the blind spot is in the development of these supply chains and support for these supply chains? Perhaps that's the government's blind spot.
Supply chains, absolutely. This is something that we absolutely have to address, and it's in our report.
You can pick that up with another questioner if you want to add to that answer. And Mrs. Stubbs, back to you for 5 minutes. Please.
Thank you, Chair. Or submit in writing so that the committee can use it. I believe that all three of you, correct me if I'm wrong, did appear in front of the Transport Committee on the debates in C5. I do just want to let you all know I tried to make an amendment in C5 to give teeth to the 2-year concrete timeline that the Liberals keep talking about. That amendment was rejected, but you can count on me to continue to push for that concrete timeline that all proponents require. So given that all three of you did participate, I think, Ms. Baiton, I'm pretty sure you were there too, or maybe you weren't, but you'll correct me. Either way, I know you'll have important things to say. I am deeply concerned because I also asked this government to define for all Canadians what they mean by the national interest. And just a couple of months ago, you may know that they have refused to define the national interest. So to give everybody an update, so far the minister has announced 11 projects for referral to the Major Projects Office. But in fact, only the Crawford Nickel cobalt mine is actually in the process of undergoing federal regulatory review. So given that we're talking about ensuring that Canada can compete, and we know we want private sector proponents to be building infrastructure and creating jobs, not neo-Marxist government politicians picking ponies, I wonder if the three of you have comments to make about how it could possibly be that Canada can turn itself into an energy superpower and build at speeds never seen before, except that also there are more than 60 projects, 60, with real private sector proponents in every single sector of natural resources stuck right now in front of the Impact Assessment Agency, the Canada Energy Regulator, and the Canada Nuclear Safety Commission. C5 does nothing about any of that. So I wonder if you have recommendations and calls to action to make to the government that has all the power on what they can actually do to ensure the private sector can build big infrastructure, provide jobs for Canadians, and all the revenue that goes to all governments of all three levels to provide programs and services that every Canadian values. And I'll just leave it to the three of you. Chair, maybe you can help here. Okay, thanks.
Go ahead. That seems like it was a question to all of you. So why don't we go around the table? There is 2 minutes and 45 seconds. to do that. Ms. Baiton.
Yes, thank you for that question. We definitely support work to advance major projects and advance them with alacrity. We have tangible examples around the globe where other countries are able to build major projects with speed. Germany, I think, built count them three, new LNG import facilities in a year. And the average time to build a project in Canada is somewhere between 9 and 16 years. So if we do want to be ready for the current new normal before us, we really have to have a profound policy reset to ensure that not only that more projects get built, but more projects get built with speed. And for us on the producer side, again, we'll leave pipelines to build pipelines, but we're concerned about what we need to do to scale up and fill and keep filled any new LNG export facility or any new oil or gas pipeline. And for us, that is the policy reset. And for us right now, the number 1A and the number 1B is the industrial carbon pricing system and the new federal methane regs. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I agree with what Lisa said there, but also, I mean, we've had an awful lot of talk and very little action. Approvals are one thing, but until we see some very tangible signs. The problem with C5 is well, there's a number of problems, but one of the main ones is subjectivity. How can an investor say, well, if so-and-so likes this project one day, then that's going to be the determinant as to whether or not it actually gets done. So I would say, unfortunately, Canada has now got a long-term record for the last decade of not getting things done, of being a country that can't get things done. The question arose earlier about how can Canada become an energy superpower? Other countries have done it. They've done it with private sector investment. There's nothing wrong with us that we can't do it, except roadblocks that the government puts in the way. So again, just I guess reinforcing that action is needed. More bureaucracy. Why do we need a major projects office? Another level of bureaucracy to do stuff that we did just fine before without these new levels of bureaucracy. Why couldn't we do it that way? We seem to have done it for years, but not anymore.
Mr. Bradley, a chance since the question was directed to all three of you. Mr. Bradley.
Yes.
Chair, I want to thank you for your generosity on that time.
Not a problem.
Thank you very much. A couple of things on project reviews. There have been over the years commitments to have a one project, one assessment approach, a 2-year timeline on the projects would be very much in order, addressing some of the other regulatory and legislative issues, including we did talk about the Fisheries Act. That continues to be one that we continue to chip away at. And then, once projects actually do move through the process and get approved, are we going to have the supply chains to be able to address this? And one of the recommendations that we put in our State of the Industry report is looking at the development of a Canadian electricity supply chain roadmap and the degree to which that might assist. So even once we get to the projects, how do we roll them out? And how do we see if we can actually build supply chains in this country? Thank you.
So, Mr. Clark, wrapping up this round, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Mr. Bradley, I wanted to ask you a few questions about the things you touched on. I'm from Nova Scotia. I represent Halifax area riding. You correctly identified that Nova Scotia has a high carbon generation system. Unfortunately, we're still burning a lot of coal, and it is very expensive to generate and consume electricity in Nova Scotia. We have the highest rates of energy poverty in the country, in our province, and generally in our region as well. And I think for you to talk about the fact that electricity demand is going to double over the next 25 years or so, I think that's the biggest question we have to address as a country when it comes to energy is how do we meet that demand? And I know you've touched on that a little bit in previous answers, but I'm just wondering, how do we meet that challenge? Because that is a profound challenge to double production, or whether it's export or import, and hopefully we're generating it ourselves over a relatively short period of time. So what's the best, most efficient way that we can make that happen?
Right. Well, I thank the member for the question, and it is certainly very relevant for the jurisdiction that you come from. As you noted, there is still coal that is being used, and for those that are not aware of the circumstances in your region, it's not by choice. It is the resources that were available at the time, and the technology that has been built. So what is that future going to look like in Atlantic Canada? It's going to require a move to new technologies. We're absolutely going to need more transmission to be able to interconnect the area, but that will give us hopefully the opportunity to open up to new projects like Wind West. Offshore wind, I mentioned off the shore of the United States, that's not moving very quickly these days because of decisions that have been made there. But we have opportunities to build here and to build in this country. But it is going to require a number of things coming together. One of them is a greater collaboration within the Atlantic Canada region, and I know there are active discussions that are taking place. It's going to require infrastructure to be built to be able to move that, and that infrastructure is also going to allow for new types of generation technology to come online.
And I'm glad that you mentioned, Wind West, and it's a major project and concept that, evidently I'm very much supportive of, and I know that our region is, in general, as my colleague mentioned, the Premier is actively working with governors in northeastern U.S. on potential agreements when that comes online. So could you just give me your views on whether it's that project in particular or the potential of offshore wind in general in meeting that huge demand ask that we talked about?
Well, I think offshore wind is going to be one of the critical pieces in Atlantic Canada. But we've seen a shift over the last decade, frankly, in terms of changing Nova Scotia's place in the North American electricity system. So a decade ago, that was the end of the line, right? The lines would end in Nova Scotia. Now Nova Scotia is interconnected with Newfoundland. And then sometime in the future, it is also going to be interconnected with offshore. And so that's going to move, just take Nova Scotia as an example, from being at the very end of the line to being in the middle of the action. And so, when we talk about what are the prospects for economic development in the region, this is again going to be something that will be I think critically important for that. One of the other things that was said earlier, though, was that we're going to have to build twice as much. Well, I don't think we are. I think we're also going to have new technology coming in online that is going to mean we don't have to double what we build because we're going to use the system more efficiently. And the example I like to use is the technology hasn't yet been implemented, but I drive an electric vehicle. I have basically I have an 82 kilowatt hour battery that just happens to be bolted onto 4 wheels. It spends 95% of its time sitting plugged in front of my house. And we've got, hundreds of thousands of these on the road. Soon we're going to have millions of these on the road. We tap into these and again, it is how can we more effectively and efficiently use the technology that we've got. And we've got Canadians that are working on developing those types of technologies.
Okay.
Thank you.
Our
Yeah,
time
we're at
is
time.
come to an end, Mr. Clark, and let me end by thanking our witnesses for joining us this afternoon. Hope you enjoyed the questions from our members. Very respectful dialogue, I thought, today, as it usually is. And thank you for joining us. And again, if you would like to present a brief, we would welcome that so that you can delve in a little more detail in some of the things you've talked about today. So thank you very much. Colleagues, we're going to go in camera, so we need a few minutes to set up, and then I think Mr. Millett has a bit of a treat for us. So we're suspending